Since 1947, the World Affairs Council has become the preeminent global stage for world leaders and the public to inform, engage, and debate the most important issues of our time. It's your world. Get to know it.
Often forgotten that when a country signs on to the UN Charter, as almost all countries have, what they do by signing that document is they confer on the UN Security Council primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security. So in a sense, it's a contract. You've signed on to the UN Charter. You say to this body, you have the responsibility for maintaining peace and security. And not only that, but they agree that the Security Council acts on their behalf. So every country that signs on to the Security Council says, hey, Security Council, you are our guardian when it comes to international peace and security. And the powers of the Council, as enumerated in the UN Charter, are really quite extraordinary. First of all, when the Council finds, and this is the kind of formal trigger for the Security Council's coercive powers to come into being, but when the Security Council finds that there's a threat to the peace, a breach of the peace, or an act of aggression, it can take whatever action it deems necessary, including enforcing sanctions, blockades, the use of force, redrawing borders. It can, in essence, do what it wants. 80%, 85% of the UN Charter was drafted at Dumbarton Oaks. And this was a conference attended by the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom. All right, so they were drafting a charter for a world organization, but they were doing so as a very elite club, the three allied powers of World War II. Now, they immediately settled on the idea that, all right, we're going to create a world body, the United Nations, but we're going to have within that a special place for the great powers. They were all determined on that right from the beginning, that there would be a special place in this body for the great powers. None of them were so humble as to say, let's create a world organization, but we won't have a special place for ourselves. We'll sit kind of with the masses out in the General Assembly. They all decided they were going to have a special place in the inner sanctum, which was the Security Council. Now, you might ask, well, why wasn't it then just 3 members of the Security Council? I think what was going on, and here we have delegates from the US, the UK, and the Soviet Union, they realized that in order for this to be acceptable to the rest of the world, it had to be a bit broader than just the 3 major allied powers. And so they decided at Dumbarton Oaks that they would add 2 other permanent members. France, and here, interestingly, the champion of France was Winston Churchill and the British government, which had decided that they needed another European great power, because they thought, we're not going to be able to keep British troops on the continent forever. We have Germany to worry about. Soviets are kind of encroaching. We need another European great power. So they very much wanted to resuscitate France as a great power. Now, this was somewhat puzzling to the United States, which had very poor relations with Charles de Gaulle during World War II, and very puzzling to Stalin, who thought the French were done as a great power. In fact, Stalin said that the French after World War II would be charming but weak. These 3 ambassadors were very important in the Security Council. This is Andrei Vyshinsky, an early Soviet ambassador, who, in addition to being the Soviet ambassador, had an extra kind of malignant aura about him because it was known that he had been the prosecutor at many of Stalin's show trials. And so this was somebody who had personally sentenced to death hundreds of people. And there he was in the Security Council kind of walking around with his colleagues. But most of what he did was actually thunder away at his colleagues. And his speeches became very famous. They would often go on for hours. And you can see here's the British ambassador, Gladwin Jeb, kind of absorbing another Soviet speech. Henry Cabot Lodge has managed to restrain himself from putting his head into his hands, but he looks kind of grumpy. This is a lot of what happened in the Council's early days. Now, this guy, Gladwin Jeb, is an interesting personality, and I tell his story in the book. He's kind of the quintessential British diplomat. Professional, career diplomat, very skilled in negotiations, not a particularly public personality. He preferred to work behind the scenes, work with documents, texts, resolutions.